Early Americans called it an icebox. To them, it was a frozen, fearful wilderness of ragged mountain peaks and barren ice fields. We know better now. In the language of the Aleut people, Alaska means the Great Place. In this rugged landscape live some of the most magnificent creatures on Earth. The first Western explorers to arrive on this coast in the early 1700s weren't actually looking for Alaska. They were trying to find a way around it, a northwest passage through the Arctic. Alaska itself was a frozen, forbidding prospect. The first Westerner to set foot on this great land also died here. The Danish explorer Vitus Bering arrived in the Aleutian Islands in 1741. With that first visit, Alaska slowly began to reveal its secrets. Georg Wilhelm Steller, a biologist with Bering's party, brought back the first written account of Alaska's wildlife. In the islands along the coast, Steller saw these giant marine mammals. Their deafening roars and tawny coloring reminded him of lions, and they became known as Steller sea lions. They are the largest of all sea lions and can weigh as much as a ton. The thick layer of blubber keeps out the Alaskan cold, which sometimes drops to 80 degrees below zero. Their bulk makes them awkward on land. But in the sea, they're so fast and agile they can hunt down squid and small fish with deadly accuracy. They crowd together on this coast because the icy waters are teeming with fish. Another marine mammal, the sea otter, charmed Bering's team with its tameness. Otters spend almost all of their lives in water cold enough to kill a human being. Their luxuriously thick fur keeps them warm with more than 800,000 hairs per square inch. It's denser than that of any other mammal. If it gets dirty and matted, it loses its insulating properties. Hair care is a matter of life and death. To keep their body temperature up, sea otters also have a high metabolic rate. They must eat a third of their body weight in fish and shellfish each day. Sea otters will dive as deep as 60 feet in search of food. Back on the surface, their bellies serve as dinner plates. A clamshell can be as frustrating for a sea otter to open as it is for us. One technique is to get a rock and start smashing. If a particular rock works well, the otter will sometimes keep it for an entire clam-eating session, tucking the rock under its arm for each dive. The sea otter's versatile belly also serves as a beach for pups. Sea otters mate and nurture their young at sea. To lessen the risk of predators, they usually do their child rearing in shallower water. The youngest pups are too buoyant to dive, and parents must briefly abandon them to find food. Sea otters sleep, as they do everything else, bobbing up and down in the water. But it can be disconcerting to drift off in the current and wake up miles away. Kelp beds are a safe anchorage. Swaddled in their long strands, the otters can sleep securely. Biologist Wilhelm Steller's fascination with sea otters dealt them a deadly blow. Describing them on his return to Europe, he alerted fur dealers to a new supply of highly prized pelts. Sea otters tend to gather in large convivial groups, and they were an easy mark. By 1760, Russian fur traders had already hunted the sea otter population close to extinction. They began to look for other sources of fur. But fur seals proved harder to catch. They always seemed to swim just out of the hunter's reach. Fur seals can shift course with lightning speed and accelerate in a powerful burst. Their keen eyes detect movement in the lowest light levels. They're more than a match for their prey and for their hunters. Then in 1786, Gavril Privalov stumbled across a huge fur seal breeding ground on the island that now bears his name. Unlike sea otters, fur seals must come ashore to breed, out of water surrounded by their young. They are slow and vulnerable. The Privalov breeding ground was the largest concentration of marine mammals in the world. Over 1 million seals. At the height of the fur trade, hunters killed 100,000 seals each year. Today, seals are protected and the Privalov Islands are once more a safe breeding ground. The bull seals, 4 times the size of females, arrive first in June. Each bull claims a tiny fiefdom and defends it vigorously. Sometimes scuffles escalate, and now and then there are serious injuries. The bulls fight for their little place on the beach, for the usual reason. The females arrive in mid-June and give birth to their young from last season's mating. Mother and pup bond by exchanging scents and recognition calls. Seal milk is rich in fat, and the nursing pups lay on 6 ounces of weight a day. Within that first week after giving birth, the mother mates again and then returns to the sea to hunt. The pups wait unattended on the beach. On her return, a mother must wade past thousands of look-alike pups, drawn to her own offspring by scent and sound. This is a time of intense sexual activity, and a bull may mate with 30 females over the course of a few days. The territorial hostilities sometimes spill over to unprotected pups. By November, all the pups are weaned, and the families are ready to return to the sea. Away from the chaotic dating games of the beach, the foxes of Pribilof Island enjoy a more relaxed breeding season. Their courting rituals are complex. Once male and female become a couple, the male marks his territory to deter outsiders. He brings food back to the vixen while she's feeding their cubs. Later, he brings meat for them too. The vixen grooms her offspring. In their first winter, the cubs will come to know the value of a well-maintained coat. The region's 18th century traders and trappers also saw value in these luxurious coats. With the fur trade in full swing, Alaska's first capital was about to be born. In 1780, the Russians chose the picturesque island of Kodiak as Alaska's first capital. For those early settlers, the wildlife of Kodiak Island was a revelation. The Kodiak bears were huge, up to 9 feet tall and 1,400 pounds, the largest land predator in the world. But nervous settlers gradually learned that Kodiak bears seldom attack humans. They're laid-back bears. They even appear to be a little drowsy, but they're more alert than they look. Their eyesight is sharp and they're quick to spot the slightest movement. Their hearing is even more acute. A Kodiak bear can hear a squeaking ground squirrel more than 500 yards away. The bear can also smell food as much as 10 miles away. Kodiak bears will eat just about anything. Roughly half their diet is vegetation, mainly berries and roots. They also eat whatever meat they can catch, from ground squirrels to young caribou and moose. Kodiak bears tend to be solitary, wandering alone over vast tracts of land. When a female is ready to breed, a male must detect her by her scent and then locate her before she passes out of season. Females are only able to breed once every 3 or 4 years, so timing is everything. Often more than one male will pursue a female. Neither of these guys makes much of an impression. She just flirts. But then, a bigger, stronger male comes along. Their splendor in the grass is a leisurely interlude. The female spends the following weeks eating to support her pregnancy through the coming winter. As the weather becomes colder, the bears head up to the hills. It gets so cold and food is so scarce that Kodiaks sleep out the winter. A bear looks for a den site that's hollow and sheltered. Then she digs in. The snow will eventually cover her like a blanket. But first she must finish making her bed, and it can take days. She just wants to sack out for the winter. She naps drowsily, tossing and turning. During the really good sleep to come, her respiration and pulse rates will slow down drastically. Her weight may drop by as much as half. But hibernation is not a deep, unwaking sleep. The bear's senses are merely dormant, and her nose is never completely off duty. Jump ahead to spring, and she wakes up to find that instead of a good long rest, she's given birth in her sleep to quadruplets. The cubs have been nursing through much of the winter, and now they emerge from the den eager for their new life. They are no doubt the great joy of her life, but a mom sometimes has trouble mustering the energy to show her finer feelings. The young bears don't seem to mind. As long as she is securely in reach, they can wrestle and play without fear. The female keeps her cubs near the safety of the den for as long as possible, while they gain in strength and size. As the winter snow melts, she brings the cubs down to the river. They are ready to learn a perilous new skill, a specialty of the bears on Kodiak Island: salmon fishing. The thaw sends rivers charging down through the rocky landscape, and it is a perfect salmon breeding ground, except for one thing. As the fish swim upriver to spawn, the otherwise solitary bears converge on the riverbanks. It is the largest gathering of bears in the world. Some bears wait in shallow pools with their snouts in the water, snorkeling for fish. Another option is to stand at a convenient rapid and wait for the fish to jump. The biggest bears pick the best spots. The younger ones have to fight for every mouthful. Bears can eat 90 pounds of salmon in a day. They prefer the younger gray salmon because they contain the most fat. Sometimes they just strip off the skin, which is the richest source of fat and protein, and leave everything else. In the end, nothing goes to waste. There's always a cleanup crew to take care of the leftovers. In the midst of this bounty, even the inexperienced cubs manage to gorge themselves. But if they get swept away in the rushing river current, they can end up in an unfriendly neighbor's patch. The mother charges to the rescue. All through the summer, food comes battling up the river. These sockeye salmon are completing an incredible journey of several hundred miles. From far out in the open sea, they're going home to breed, on the very site where they began their lives 4 years earlier. They travel 20 or 30 miles a day against the current. Once they reach their breeding grounds upstream, the intricate mating rituals begin. The female lays her eggs, and the male instantly fertilizes them with clouds of sperm. Their lives are now over. By the end of the spawning, there will not be a single fish left alive. But among the dead and dying fish hidden away on the riverbed, the fertilized eggs are already developing. For 3 or 4 months, the hatchlings remain hidden in the riverbed, in the first phase of an extraordinary life story. The developing young, known as alevins, live off the yolk sac. Once the yolk is gone, the tiny hatchlings transform themselves into fry. The fry turn away from the sea and set off upriver to a freshwater lake where they will remain for up to 2 years, eating and growing. They're easy prey for larger fish during this time. Only 1 in 6 will make it to the next stage. Their adult lives will take them into the open sea, but first they must go through a physiological change called smolting to prepare them for life in salt water. Then they follow the river back down to the sea. Like their parents before them, they're heading for the cold waters of the Alaskan oceans. By the middle of the 19th century, these oceans had taken on a new role in the history of Alaska. American hunters flooded in looking for new sources of blubber, which was much in demand as a lamp fuel. On Walrus Island, they found huge colonies, up to 10,000 animals, of the world's most successful blubber producers. Walruses, often 13 feet long, weigh as much as 3,500 pounds, most of it blubber. They generate their bulk from a steady diet of small marine creatures, mainly shellfish from the sea floor. Diving 200 feet or more, they suction the flesh from the shells like huge vacuum cleaners. They feed almost non-stop on hunting trips lasting as much as 3 days. Walruses are sociable animals and usually travel in groups. Even with their blubber to protect them, a long spell at sea can turn the walruses literally blue with cold. So it's back to the beach to warm up. It's a walrus Coney Island. Everyone needs a little quiet time to rest and digest their catch. Up to 300 pounds of it at a time. The walruses use their distinctive tusks to establish a pecking order. As with elephants, longer tusks are a sign of strength and dominance. Tusks, which are actually adapted teeth, are useful tools for breaking through the thick winter ice. The walrus also uses them to help lever itself out of the water. This technique gave rise to the scientific name Odobenus rosmarus, from the Greek for one who walks with his teeth. Fortunately for these great creatures, the American blubber hunters did not stay long at Walrus Island. An even richer bounty diverted their attention. Whales were becoming scarce in southern oceans, but they were still plentiful around Alaska. The Alaskan humpbacks had plenty of blubber, and also a strong, flexible substance in their mouths, called baleen. The baleen is like a thick comb around the fringes of the mouth, with which the whale can filter out 50 pounds of krill and plankton from every gulp of seawater. The sturdy comb plates were in demand in the 19th century, especially for the stays in ladies' corsets. For the whales, the best way to escape hunters was to dive. Humpbacks, being mammals, cannot breathe underwater, but they can dive for 20 minutes on a single lungful of air, long enough to confuse most hunters. The spectacular behavior known as breaching isn't a weapon or a game. It's a sort of telegraph system. The sound of the crash resonates through the ocean. Marine mammals have evolved extraordinary methods to communicate with one another, even when they are hundreds of miles apart. These killer whales generate clicks and whistles in a special organ in the head. Each group of whales has a signature call, unique to its members. This call is a sort of membership badge and helps the whales work together as a deadly team when they hunt. Killer whales have sharp teeth, not baleen. They earn their name. But they are also intensely social animals, and their lives make the waters off Alaska resonate with meanings we have not even begun to understand. Adventurers came to Alaska mainly for the material riches of the coast, but the tantalizing interior soon drew them inland. By the 1860s, with the fur trade dwindling, the Russians began to lose interest in Alaska. In 1867, the United States bought Alaska from Russia for a price of $7 million, or just 2 cents an acre. Much of America ridiculed the move, calling Alaska Wall Russia and a dreary waste. Unyielding glaciers, magnificent but useless, occupy 29,000 square miles of Alaska. The most spectacular of these glaciers run right down to the sea, where chunks of ice calve off into icebergs, some as tall as a 13-story building. Americans were still grumbling about the purchase of Alaska in 1898. Then overnight, everything changed. On the border with Alaska, in Canada's Yukon Territory, gold was discovered. Eager prospectors poured into the uncharted interior. Few of them struck it rich, and many starved and froze in the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. Ravens gathered to feed on the carrion. The cry of the wolf, which struck terror in the hearts of the exhausted frozen prospectors, still echoes across the countryside. Unlike the prospectors, the wolves are well adapted to the rigors of the climate. Dense fur keeps them warm at sub-zero temperatures, and they can survive without food for weeks until the pack makes a kill. As the ice begins to melt in spring, the females find a sheltered place and make a den to give birth. The mother is attentive to her cubs, cleaning their fur and biting off the placenta. Temperatures still hover around freezing. The cubs depend on their mother for warmth. Wolf packs are cooperative groups. When a female is nursing, other adults will hunt for her. After 3 weeks, the cubs begin to venture outside the den. Soon they develop a taste for meat. The cub's father helps provide for his growing family, and sometimes takes his turn at babysitting. Wolves eat the kill on the spot and then regurgitate the partly digested food when they reach the safety of the den. It may not be what we think of as home cooking, but the cubs seem to like it. As they grow, the cubs test their strength and play fights. One cub already has the upper hand. The social life of the pack follows a strict hierarchy, and cubs quickly establish their own pecking order. Each wolf pack ranges over a territory of up to 2,000 square miles. There are 2 top dogs, the alpha male and the alpha female. And below this is an established ranking, constantly reinforced by greeting rituals. The famous wolf howl is just one of the ways in which wolves warn or greet each other. The note is so penetrating that any wolf within 120 square miles will get the message. The caribou hear it too. They are the world's most traveled land animal. Their annual migration takes them more than 1,000 miles. As spring approaches, the caribou move north across Alaska. They're heading towards their breeding grounds, where the summer vegetation will build up their strength. By late May, the first calves are being born. It's a coordinated effort. 90% are born within the same week. With so many calves together, and the herd's attention firmly focused on them, predators find it harder to pick off individuals. The calves settle swiftly into their new lives. Within an hour they can walk, and by the end of the day they can outrun a human. They will double their birth weight in 10 days. During the summer months, the caribou are plagued by insects which lay eggs in their fur and feed on their blood. To escape this misery, the caribou keep moving on, heading up to the cool mountain slopes. It can get uncomfortably warm under the caribou's fur coat, so the caribou cool themselves through their antlers, releasing heat from blood vessels on the surface. Both sexes have antlers, unlike most other deer, so female caribou stay cool too. The long trail takes the caribou across many perilous river crossings. With their broad, paddle-like hooves, caribou are strong swimmers. Their waterproof fur coats protect them from the icy water, which comes straight from the glaciers. It's cold enough to kill a human in seconds. In late September, with food on the northern ranges becoming scarce, the caribou begin to head south for the winter. On the way, the bulls come into rut and begin to fight for mating privileges. As winter closes in, the herds reach the southern end of their migration and settle in for the bitter Alaskan winter. Their neighbors, the wolves, are already waiting. The caribou are fast and agile, so only the weakest animals are at serious risk in the beginning. Wolves hunt as a pack. They test the herd to find and isolate its most vulnerable member. The caribou, fit from their summer feeding, outwit the wolves. But as winter wears on, they will be more susceptible, and the wolves will take their share. Few of the Gold Rush settlers stayed to share the Alaskan winter with the wolves and the caribou, but in the mid-20th century, another extraordinary discovery opened up Alaska's final frontier. In 1958, modern prospectors discovered oil at Prudhoe Bay. The Alaska Purchase was turning out to be a bargain after all. Finding the oil was one thing, moving it another. America responded to the challenge with the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline. 800 miles of triumphant technology. The pipeline carries millions of gallons of oil through some of the world's most unyielding, ice-bound wilderness. Oil workers in the frozen landscapes of Prudhoe Bay saw Alaska as a stark white world where hardly anything moved, except for one massive animal, which terrified them. More than 4,000 polar bears roam this desolate region of Alaska. Undeterred by the harsh winter, this female has made a den deep beneath the snow. Here she has borne her cubs and fed them through the coldest months, emerging only on sunny days to catch up on housekeeping. In March, the new cubs emerge from the dark warmth of the den. It's their first real look at the dazzling world outside. Even on a spring day, it's at least 20 degrees cooler out here than the den. The cubs already have a protective layer of fat, and their thick fur coats are custom made to shrug off snow and water. Even so, they feel the howling wind. These cubs will stay with their mother for 2.5 years. She'll teach them the skills they'll need to provide for themselves in this barren world. These first months are mostly a time for play, and like youngsters everywhere, the cubs find the snow irresistible. The cubs' play fighting teaches them coordination and helps them develop and strengthen their muscles. The wrestling matches are rehearsals for the more serious competitions that sometimes occur between rival adult males. It's a battle of titans. A full-grown male polar bear weighs as much as 6 human adults. In this icy environment, the polar bear's main problem is finding enough to eat. Their diet consists almost entirely of seals, but the bears may have to travel long distances to find them. They can swim up to 50 miles without stopping. They use their powerful front paws to propel themselves. Their back legs serve only as rudders. The bear will swim in surface channels to follow the seal it is tracking, or dive from one breathing hole to the next. When it finds the seal, the bear tries to sneak up on it. But seals frequently spot the approaching hunter. So some bears simply stand motionless by a breathing hole, sometimes for hours, waiting for the magic moment when a seal rears its head out of the water for a lungful of air. The powerful bear makes short work of the hapless seal. Arctic foxes are the only land animals to share this frozen wilderness with the polar bears. They are the scavengers of the Arctic, and often trail the bears in anticipation of a kill. Polar bears don't just devour their prey whole. They prefer the fat, and sometimes leave the rest for the fox. These two may be the only animals to be seen in dozens of square miles of frozen desolation. United by the kill, they strike up an uneasy companionship. From their vantage point at the top of the world, the mighty polar bears have overseen the ebb and flow of Alaska's history. Their kingdom has been broached but never threatened. Human visitors have trespassed only briefly. And in the far north of the great place called Alaska, the evidence of our intrusions quickly vanishes beneath a fresh fall of snow. Alaska remains an untamed wilderness, a last frontier for the modern world.